Hey guys, what's going on? This is John from Friends with Your Benefits. Employers are at a crossroads right now. Many employers out there are experiencing higher than usual increases in medical and prescription drug costs. And on top of that, with the CAA, they have some enhanced fiduciary responsibilities that they have to adhere to. The old standard used to be that you should do a claims audit every 3 to 5 years, but with the CAA, that may be changing. And joining us today, we have Chris Chan, who's been on our show previously, and my former colleague. Hey, Chris, how's it going? Welcome back.
It's fantastic. Great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, Chris, why don't we get right into it? Let's talk about finHealth and the CAA and fiduciary responsibility. So, I guess to really start off with, right, the old standard of auditing your medical and prescription drug plan every 3 to 5 years, is that still the gold standard?
Yeah, unfortunately, today audits provide a false sense of security. They've been handicapped in terms of the number of claims that you can review, generally limited to 200 or 250 claims, a single point in time from 12 to 18 months ago. Sometimes they've all been pre vetted by the carrier that has to sign off on the ones that you can look at. And so they've already cherry picked the things that have limited or no issues associated with them. And I liken this to the credit cards monitoring our personal spending. And none of us would be happy if our credit cards only looked at a fraction of a percent of our personal spending. Why are we allowing that on the billions of dollars that flow through healthcare expense? And so the gold standard today should be review of 100% of the claim stream, a mix of both prepayment review on large claims so that you can intervene before money goes out the door, and then post payment review of everything else to find systemic issues.
So I think that's obviously that would be great. One thing that I commonly hear from many of the major national carriers is that their provider contracts don't allow for what I'll call prepayment review. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so that might be what the carrier has negotiated in their contract, but the increased scrutiny and fiduciary responsibility that employers have is to be able to make sure that they check invoices, understand the receipts, are paying fair and reasonable prices, and being able to defend that as a fiduciary on the plan. And unless the health plan is willing to sign on as a co-fiduciary, then the employer has every right and is legally required to be able to have access to this data and make sure that the charges are appropriate before they provide permission for funds to be withdrawn to pay the provider claims.
Can you give us an overview of how finHealth can help employers out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So our goal is to review 100% of the claim stream as close to real time as possible. And that means daily, weekly, and monthly file feeds. We work with all the major carriers, TPAs, PBMs to get this data and make sure one, do those files and records match what the employer has actually been seeing in terms of withdrawals from their funding account, but also to be able to intervene and look for errors, duplicates, aggressive, excessive pricing charges, ineligible members that might have claims on the plans, subrogation issues, outright fraud. There's a whole host of errors and waste and fraud that we see within leakage on the health plans and the pharmacy side as well. And so our goal is to be able to summarize that for an employer, process tens of millions of claims very quickly, turn around our analysis, and float all the needles in the haystack to the surface. Have humans validate and prioritize, because we all have limited time and resources. And we know that any issue that we bring forward, we want to make sure that the employer is in agreement. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't check out. Well, we want to verify this and then be able to take that to the health plan and the PBM and say, hey, we have questions about this. There's this large group of claims that all checks out and looks good, but there's a handful here that we think there's something that looks funny. Here's our backup documentation, why we have questions about it. And we go back and ask 3 questions. One, we've identified a potential error here. Do you agree with our findings? 2, if so, why didn't your system catch it directly? And then most importantly, 3, how do we make sure that we prevent this from recurring in the future? And certainly address systemic or programmatic issues and prevent them from ever recurring again. And that way we put in the right safeguards and protections for employers as a fiduciary to make sure they're monitoring their programs appropriately.
So, two things you said I want to definitely circle back on. So, when it relates to carrier errors, are there any like themes? Is it something that's just programmed wrong in the system? Is it a human error? Like, what are the most common types of errors that you typically catch?
We see a whole variety. There might be something that's a fat fingered mistake, and we've seen the price of a breast pump get entered in for both price and quantity. So you can just imagine the excessive multiples that were allowed through the plan because of the many duplicates that were entered in, and that the system didn't catch that. We might see someone that's ineligible for a plan actually have charges. And so we will want to flag that and make sure, okay, are we getting the right eligibility data come through? And actually, if I can share my screen,
Yep.
we have some examples prepared that would be helpful to bring this to life and show some of the things that we're finding on our side. So here's a first example. We've blacked out some of the protected information, and these are illustrative to give a sense of the types of things that we find. So in this first example, this is us looking at millions of different claim records and actually identifying that there's a duplicate here. And here you see the allowed amounts are actually different. One's for 5,000, one's for 8,000, but actually the member's the same, and the time of service dates actually overlap. So you have this hospital billing for January 31st on the claim in the upper left, and then you see a second claim come through that's overlapping on the 31st of January through the beginning of February. So now you're getting charged 4 days within 3 days time. That's an example of a non-obvious duplicate within the plan.
Sure.
Here's a second example. And for this one, we're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars of billed charges, and the plan paid for it in full. There was zero discount taken on $423,000 of claims here. And that makes us wonder, was something missed? Because it seems very odd. We know how much of a discount this health system or this provider will typically have. And so something like this, where there's zero discount, seems very strange to us.
Chris, am I looking at this right? That it says as a percentage of Medicare, it's over 8,000%. I know my eyes are hurting me, but am I looking at that correct?
That's another red flag that we would catch.
Wow.
You are reading that correct. Not just 300, 500, 1,000. We're talking about 8,000% above what Medicare would pay for this.
That's something.
It's crazy. Yeah. Third example here, we have $110,000 billed by a physician. This is a professional service fee. And he had an assistant surgeon also. That was an additional $44,000. So we're looking at $150,000 in professional fees. And in contrast, the facility charge was only $50,000. And so it makes us wonder, okay, why are the professional fees 3 times what the hospital was charging? And then here on this side, you have the amount that Medicare would have paid would have been 0. And the reason why Medicare would have denied this, because the couple of codes that this was billed against are non-specific. A blood vessel procedure, nervous system procedure, there's not enough details to substantiate what was actually delivered on the professional side. And so Medicare would want more information in order to make sure that this was appropriately paid. In this case, the carrier paid $150,000 for the professional fees. It's crazy. This one's just very obvious. Outpatient visit. We have this provider charging $25,000 for 3 outpatient visits. And if you benchmark the rest of the market across the country, these 3 visits should have cost less than $100. And yet, why is the plan allowing $25,000 in charges here? And here you see members paying thousands of dollars out of pocket. This really concerns us because this is people putting on their credit card or going into the medical debt, and there aren't the right safeguards in place for the patient. The patient gets the bill. They don't want it to go to collections. They got the billing office hounding them. A lot of people just end up paying these things because they assume, well, this must be what I owe. It must be processed accurately. So I'm going to pay this before it impacts my
Never pay the first bill, right? There's a book out there called that. Yeah.
Exactly right.
I almost wonder for this one too, right? So we've been hearing about as the hospital systems buy up, a lot of these provider groups, they sometimes have the providers see their patients in the hospital setting. I wonder if this on an outpatient basis, I wonder if that's one of these examples here. But I digress.
Yeah, you have to wonder what conflicts of interest might exist. They're often not apparent how the money flow is exchanging hands, and so there's definitely a lot of conflicts of interest within the market. Yeah, so here on this 5th example, we have $105,000 in charges, and if you look at the detail, it's actually an air ambulance charge, and for out-of-network services like this, there's actually the No Surprises Act that's in place that's supposed to put protections and caps on what can be charged for these types of services. Unfortunately, we see many carriers just universally misinterpreting how the No Surprises Act should be applied, not putting in those caps, still passing along a majority of the cost to the employer in excess of hundreds of thousands of dollars, even though when it should be a much lower amount that's paid.
Incredible.
So, hopefully those examples brought these things to life. And I wish I could say I was cherry picking and trying to find these things, but we see them repeatedly across all the clients that we support.
So the big term in the marketplace is AI right now, and there's various definitions of what AI actually is. Is your model a form of AI? Is it like a souped up algorithm? How would you ultimately describe it, Chris? And like when does the human interaction actually come in?
Yeah, we're definitely software, and there's elements of AI, machine learning, and I don't want to overuse the buzzwords, but our goal is to be able to use the power of software to be able to process tens of millions of claims annually and find the anomalies, find the needles in the haystack, float those to the surface, and then have humans validate and prioritize and present those findings to our clients, any trusted advisors that are involved in the relationship in terms of a consultant or a broker, but then especially back to carrier TPA, PBM. Hey, we know we all have limited resources here. Here's an error that we've identified, and we need resolution on this. We need to see whether or not our findings are accurate or not. And there are going to be plenty of examples that are black and white, clear cut. This is an error. There's something that was calculated incorrectly. And so we need this addressed. We don't want to make sure that our employer client is not overpaying for this.
So I think the prepayment part is huge, right? And I kind of believe it as with the hospitals and some provider groups, they play the game of catch me if I can. And it's easier to take care of the mistake before the money's gone out the door. Once the money's gone out the door, right? Let's say you catch something from a post payment review perspective. Are there any strategies out there that you recommend to employers to try to recover that money that was overpaid to providers or hospital systems?
Yeah, we still present those results back to the carrier, and if needed, even to the provider, to the hospital system, if we don't get a sufficient answer from the carrier directly. And sometimes we'll get either of those parties willing to work because it's such a blatant, obvious error or mistake that was made, and there's money that we can get recovered back. Sometimes we're at an impasse and we're not able to get any movement on the pass, but we can at least put in fixes to turn off the spigot to make sure that we don't see that error ever happen again into the future. Or there might be other strategies to direct contract, carve out, center of excellence, renegotiate, some other more sophisticated lever that needs to be pulled from a broader strategic perspective. But at least we've uncovered the potential problem area in the past, and we know what we need to attack going forward.
So no, I mean, I think this has great potential out there. One thing that I wonder out loud, right? So when it comes to audits, and certainly I've been involved in regular audits in the past, it seems like sometimes with the national carriers, they can be a little apprehensive as it relates to audits. And I imagine if you're looking at their data on a daily basis, sometimes it's tough to play in the sandbox. So since most employers out there, not all, but most employers do have a national carrier or two in place, do you find that they're willing to work with finHealth, or what's been their attitude towards the findings when finHealth presents it to them?
We try to make it as cooperative and collaborative as possible. And our goal is to make their systems and policies and procedures improved and enhanced. And the recommendations and the findings that we identify in terms of an error or something that's programmatic, they should deploy that fully for that client, but they should deploy it across that network or that book of clients, that book of business that might be impacted to that improvement as well. Unfortunately, we don't see that second step happening. And it has to make you wonder, why don't they implement these things more broadly? And unfortunately, what you find is there's often payment integrity programs or shared savings programs that the carriers run where they drive a tremendous amount of revenue on these mistakes or these things that they flag on a secondary level review, and they can take credit for, instead of just fixing the issue on the front end, there's revenue to be made on the back end. And that is just one example of the conflicts of interest that exist when employers have handed over an open checkbook and trusting that these things are being paid accurately and appropriately. Unfortunately, that trust is being taken advantage of. And that's part of the reason why employers have had such high trends in the past. And it feels like it's increasing as we look out to 2025 and beyond.
Absolutely. And for all clients out there, I highly recommend that they obtain a total revenue disclosure document from the carrier. If you need help with that, feel free to reach out. And then for many employers, particularly those that are on the larger side, many times the carriers are willing to agree to an overall PPM cap on those fees, but you really have to negotiate with it and show why it's in the best interest of all parties to have that. And that's one strategy to perhaps mitigate some of that revenue, which flows at sometimes as a claim wire charge. So they might not even be aware of it unless you know which reports to ask for. So, Chris, if you don't mind me asking, how many clients does finHealth currently have, give or take, today?
Yeah, we're over 25 clients at this point, over 700,000 lives on the platform. Fully at scale, we've done it very purposefully in terms of our growth to make sure that the analysis and the product works and it's scalable, and we can take on clients of any size. Our smallest group that we support is 600 lives, and the largest is several 100,000, and we can serve any group size in between. So an exciting time, especially as employers are faced with this increased scrutiny and fiduciary responsibility. I'm certainly looking to companies like finHealth to be able to pull as a lever and demonstrate payment of fair and accurate prices.
Fair enough. Do you guys just focus on medical, or potentially could you do prescription drug and dental as well?
Yeah, we do all the above. Workers' comp can be thrown in there as well, but certainly medical is a big driver of the overall costs, and we can evaluate that whole spectrum of data.
Sounds good. So, Chris, let's say there's someone out there, right? They want to learn a little bit more about FinHealth, or perhaps they want to connect with you. Where can they go?
Yeah, certainly. You can reach out via email. My email is cchan at finhealth.com. Find me on LinkedIn. You can go to our website, finhealth.com. There's a contact form on there as well. Happy to schedule an initial conversation. And part of our overall process is we'll look at your data for free. We'll look at the last year. We have a standard data request, and we can turn around an analysis in 5 to 10 business days and highlight the errors that unfortunately have already passed through in the last year. But one of the things that we found is there will be issues we identify that have happened in the last 1 or 2 months with enough recency that we can actually still intervene and get money back, save money for that group even before they become a customer of ours. And that just becomes part of the business case for a full ongoing rollout of FinHealth services.
Sounds good, Chris. Well, thank you for coming on the show today. I certainly learned a lot. And for audience out there, we want to hear from you. What do you think of the future of fiduciary responsibility as it relates to employer based healthcare coverage? Comment below.